So how do you go from a linear equation and actually turn it into a graph? So if you're given the equation to begin with, you kind of have to think about what we did last week and think about it a little bit backwards. The idea of needing to find your slope from a graph. Now we're giving you that information, you have to graph it. So the first piece of information is to make sure you can identify in your equation what is the slope and what is the y-intercept. So in this case, the number that's attached to x, the multiplier for x, that's your slope. So we know now that m equals 2. Now when it comes to actually counting your slope, it's really helpful to turn this into a fraction. So what I would do is I would turn this into 2 over 1 because you want to count rise over run. So this slope tells you that starting from a point, you are going to go up 2 squares and over 1 square. So that's what you're going to do. You know your slope is going to be up 2 and over 1. The key is, though, is slope doesn't help you if you don't have anywhere to start from. What you have to be careful of is not to make the mistake of thinking that every line starts in the origin. They don't. In this case, this line definitely does not go through the origin because of this important piece of information. This is b. So remember that equation that we've been doing in these slides, y equals mx plus b. There's your m was 2, b is the number on the end, and you do need to include the positive or negative sign. You need to remember that. So b equals negative 4. And so the reminder again is that that is your y-intercept. That's where the graph crosses the y-axis. So that's where you really want to start from. You're almost starting from the end of the equation as opposed to the beginning. So what you want to do is look at the negative 4 and say that is where my line crosses the y-axis. The y-axis is the vertical one. Up here is all positive numbers. Below the x-axis is your negatives. So 1, 2, 3, 4. There is your start point. That is step 1. Plot your y-intercept on the graph. Now you've got somewhere to count your slope from. So once you have a point on the graph, and it can be any point, it doesn't have to be the y-intercept, but in this case with the equations, that's what you're given. So that's what you're going to start with. And then we're going to count. Now I'm going to show you the actual counting by using arrows. When you do your own copies of these questions, you don't have to actually physically draw the arrows every single time, but I do want to make sure that you can see what we're doing. So we know the rise is 2 and the run is 1. So from this point, we're going to go up 1, 2 squares, and over 1. Now be careful of the fact that you need to make sure this matches your scale. Our scale is just going to be 1 to 1, and we put a point there. And then from that point, you count your slope again. Up 1, 2 squares, and over 1 for rise over run. And then from that point, you're going to do it again. Up 1, 2 squares, over 1. And basically you just keep counting this. Because it's a straight line, the slope is the same everywhere on the line. So anywhere you have a point, you know that your next point is going to be 2 squares higher and 1 square to the right. And you could just keep doing that forever and ever, or as long as you need to, until you get enough points where you feel comfortable drawing a line. You can also work backwards if you need to. This is helpful if you run out of space on the grid. And instead of going up 2 and to the right 1, you can always go completely backwards and go down 2 to the left 1. And the key is you'll know if you did that point right because it should fall in line with all the rest of the points. And then we're just going to connect them. By the way, when you do this, please do it in pencil, not pen. I'm using pen because it shows up better on the screen. So there's one with a positive slope and a negative y-intercept. Let's take a look at one more on the next side. This one doesn't give you the equation. I wanted to show it to you a little differently. This is one where we show you the slope and the y-intercept separately as m and b. So remember that m is your slope and b is your y-intercept. So your equation for this one is y equals negative 3 over 4 x. And in this case, since it's 5, it will be plus 5 in your equation. So that's what your equation would look like. In this case, you know your slope now, you know your y-intercept. So just like we did the last time, I'm going to put in purple, you start at your y-intercept, so at b. In this case, because it's a positive number, we're going to go on the positive side of the y-axis, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we put a dot there. And then our slope, since it's negative 3 over 4, this is our rise. This is our run. And remember from last week's lessons and previous stuff that your rise and your run, the negative I recommend to always keep with your rise. So we're going to go down 3 spaces now and the run is still going to go to the right 4. If you go down and to the left, what you're going to end up with is a slope that ends up going up and being positive. As soon as you see this negative, you know you have a negative slope. You can see what I'm writing there. So your line, wherever it goes from here to this point, we know it should be going downwards. If you draw it and it goes upwards, it means you counted the negative twice when you counted your rise over run, and you ended up canceling it out inadvertently. So from here we look and we say, since there's a negative, we use it with the 3, and we go down 1, 2, 3 squares, and from there over 1, 2, 3, 4. And there we go, there's our next point. And you want to draw as many points as you can fit on the grid. So then we're going to go down 1, 2, 3 more, and to the right 1, 2, 3, 4. And we put a point there. Now that's all the ones I can fit here. I can't work backwards because if I want to go up to the left, I would end up off the grid. So that's as many as I can fit. And if all you can get in is 3 points, that's totally fine. And what you really should do when you're done your lines is you should also label them, which I didn't do on the other one. My bad. But there we go. You should label your line. This is really important, especially if you do a sheet that has more than one line on it. You need to make sure you label each line so that the person reading the sheet knows which line matches with which equation. So that is graphing a line from an equation and from slope and a point. Hope that helps. Thanks.